Thank you, Shireen. Great. So with that, I'll take us to item 1.03, which are additions or modifications to the agenda. And I believe that we'd want to make at least one to allow Karen to give us an update on if she's had any responses for the past RFP. Would anybody like to make that modification?
I'll make it.
Great.
Second.
Great. So maybe we'll just make that 1.04 and we'll add, Commissioner Durfee added a line item for an update on the what are those called?
References.
References for the community facilitator RFP, seconded by Commissioner Hart. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Seeing none, that passes unanimously, and we'll go straight into the update.
Got my update, Sabrina?
Yes.
Sorry. I sent off after I got the document out of my junk file. I sent off two references. I think we discussed two, and I am waiting. I called and sent emails, so I have not heard anything back.
Okay. Sorry, and you just did references for two of the companies or for two?
We decided last meeting that we would just do two references. So not for two companies, but for one company. But I did review all of the references, and I selected two and sent out notifications and called both of those folks. And it was late in the day, so hopefully we'll hear something by tomorrow.
Okay. It might be good to email everyone just that we get two responses, I think was what we decided on, was to shoot an email to all of them and then hope that we get two responses. But not to call all of them, because that would be.
No, I don't think there are several. Yeah, okay. I will. I can easily send that email to the rest of the folks. I can do that as soon as we're done with this meeting.
Great. Does anybody have any questions for Commissioner Durfee? Great, then I'll move us into public forum. Did anybody want to speak? Shannon?
I did have only one request, and it's from Lee Morgan. And Lee, I don't see you on the call unless you're calling in. And this is your telephone number.
Great, then we'll also open it up to anyone who's just an attendee. If anybody wants to talk, feel free to raise your hand. And I believe if you're on a cell phone, that is, does anybody know? I feel like it's *6. *9. Last chance to raise hands. Otherwise, we will move on to item 3.01, which everyone should have in their inbox, possibly in their junk mail. And I'll have Audrey, if you don't mind sharing your screen so we can go through the RFP together. So I made changes and I tracked changes so folks can see them from the original to what it is now. Happy to take feedback on any sections. My goal is hopefully we can get it to a place today that we all feel comfortable with or comfortable enough with to hand it back to city staff to finalize and send out. There was a place that had previously just had call data where I think we need a little bit more text that is, yeah, thanks for scrolling. On this page, there were some things where I thought we should add, given that we, the call for the proposal had been to examine who, what, where, and how we police. And I didn't quite find all the words for it after doing the editing. But if folks could help me add here, I think that would be helpful. But other than that, I'll open it up for people to make edits, changes. If nobody disputes any of my edits, I think at the end of this, we would want to accept them. But with that, I will hand it over to you all to make changes as you see fit.
Soraya, do you think we should go through this section by section, just to, see if that might help organize questions or comments that people have?
Yep. So
yeah, that'll be helpful to me because I just got out of work, so I haven't even had a chance to look at it. So I'm looking at this for the first time. So I wouldn't want to, and I'm trying to read through it right now, but I think that would be very helpful.
If that is your preference, I don't know if I should just give you all a minute but first section is the executive summary, which I made a few changes to. The first paragraph just talks about the general purpose. The only change I made there was changing it to barriers and benefits rather than feasible and cost effective, which is a change that you'll see made throughout the resolution or throughout the request for proposals. Sorry, so used to doing resolutions. Then, and it kind of continues along that vein of what are we here for? And I changed those questions slightly. And then the third paragraph is around what we're seeking, and I made some changes to having it be looser to be criminal justice familiarity as a whole, as well as change management as opposed to specific to policing, just to make sure we're not excluding someone who maybe has adjacent relevant experience.
Just for me, I don't have any additions or changes. I think that first section and the next section on background are fine.
And Soraya, I'm not really chiming in because I already reviewed this, so.
Great. Okay, so I'm hearing that 2 are fine with the first 2 sections.
You mean section 1, just section 1 and 2 is what you
1
mean?
and 2.
Let me just see where the first. Yeah, I didn't have any comments until 4 and 5.
I'm also good with 1 and 2.
Right. So people can definitely feel free. Oh, welcome, Franklin. People can definitely feel free to jump on to say anything else about section 1 and 2. Section 2 is just background on the resolution and the joint committees. Section 3 is a list of attachments. I didn't remember what the report was called, but I thought that we should add whatever the name of that report is, which Audrey, if at some point you, or Shannon, if you, or Stephanie would know what it was called, can add the exact title of that. That would be good. And then if folks have anything to add here, feel free to let us know. But other than that, moving on to section 4, which is the scope of work. And here I'll just give people a minute. This is the part that I would like some substantive input, just because I didn't get to it. Was adding some language here around who, where, and how. So I'll give folks just a minute to read through it, knowing that a lot of us didn't get a chance to do it because I sent it so late.
Could I get a quick definition of PSAP based?
I don't know. Shannon might know this better than me, but I feel like it might be the regional dispatch. It's a type of dispatch from my understanding. So I think it might be the 9, maybe is the 911 call or a different type.
That's correct. Yes. The E911.
Yeah, and the chief is on,
Yeah.
is in attendance if you need to elevate him at any point with questions.
Yeah, you can go ahead and elevate him anyway because he's got a quick update for us after this.
Which section are we on now?
We are on section 4.
Oh, I have at least one thought.
Anyone type in at any time.
There's no lines. So on sorry, line numbers, but on section 4, second paragraph under what? The paragraph what? Just I would tweak. This seems oddly specific, but I guess I'm getting hung up on this aspect of using the term public safety call volume as opposed to like Burlington Police Department call volume. Just because I find that in my brain, the term public safety goes to like a very broad concept. And I think this, what I'm understanding with this RFP is that it's meant to be pretty focused on the police department and relatively focused on like community issues once they like reach the need for sort of like crisis response or police response. So I don't know if that makes sense to just change it to say Burlington's current police department call volume. And I know it seems really specific, but I feel like it all like made sense of the sort of the way it was focused up until that point, and then I was starting to get confused again around that. I don't know why it's very oddly specific, but that was just something that I saw. I'm trying to think of other things that I highlighted. Other people can go. I'm just sort of.
What was the specific change? You just wanted to delete that?
Or just write like police department call volume instead of public safety call volume.
Okay.
The term public safety, I think, is just too broad. Maybe I'm just the only one getting confused about this, but it confuses me. Trying to think. I guess, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I guess the only thing that I may be still confused about is that under this section scope of work, and I'm sorry, this is going to be kind of rambling because I'm just trying to make sense of this in my head. But like, I guess I still don't understand. So the primary question that we're looking to answer as described, how does this compare with who, what, where, and how we are currently policing? I guess I still don't understand how, I know we're looking for alternatives to policing. Like, I just don't understand how the scope of work is looking at like the way that the Burlington Police Department is policing. Or maybe I'm just like missing it and I'm not reading it right or something. But
I also thought that was partially missing, which is part of the reason that I at least put the framing in there and hoped that you all had some additions. One quick change, Audrey, if we could remove on that fourth line in that paragraph, legality and feasibility, and change it to benefits and barriers.
So on Harry's.
I see what you're saying, Zaraya, about the who, where, and how, add here, add here, add here. Oh, I see what you're saying, that we would add things there.
Yes.
Gotcha. I don't know. I think it was in pink and my brain just like was like, oh, I don't know. I still have the track changes set on and my brain is only partially.
So on the public safety language, are we wanting to capture calls to Howard Street outreach, for example? Or are we strictly going by police department call volume?
That's what was unclear to me. And I wonder if we do want to do that, can we just write that then specifically? Like how other agencies like Howard Center, blah, blah, blah. So it's just really more specific.
Yeah, is Chief Murad?
He's not on the call, but it would be useful to know if like Howard Center calls actually, or street outreach goes through the police department. I think all you need to do is add a sentence in here that indicates you're talking about calls for service directly to the police or other community agencies.
Hey, Chief, are you hearing this discussion? We're trying to figure out how we should best describe the call volume. Is it?
He's not on the call anymore.
I am.
Yeah, he is.
I am.
Okay.
I was looking at the attendees, but I didn't realize you're on as a panelist.
Well, I think I was just promoted because Commissioner
Sure.
Hart was asking.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot.
What I want to keep myself only to specific answers. I don't want to, add 2 cents. So what was the question? I'm sorry.
Okay, so can you, are you able to see the screen share right now?
I am.
Okay, so the language is the highlighted language.
Mhm.
Of primary importance is analyzing Burlington's current, and the language was public safety call volume and workload. And what we're trying to make sure is we have concise enough language, but not too concise that we exclude what might be included in calls. So would street outreach be ever that would, like, what comes into the police department? We're trying to capture that, the whole point here is to make sure we have an idea of the calls that potentially are handled by the department or other service providers that we need to be aware of.
So the calls that come from the PSAP, and that's the public safety answering point. It was a component of the presentation that we did about how dispatch works. The calls, it's what you get when you call 911 rather than calling direct to our dispatch. The calls that come from the dispatch from the PSAP really go into 2 directions. They either go to fire or they go to police. And that's why public safety is the term here, because we are counting some calls that are police oriented in that we end up co-responding or sending police to them also, or upon responding, fire says we need police as well. So those things do need to be counted, not at the PSAP level, but at the dispatch level, because a fire officer does not call 911 to say, I want police at this scene. A fire officer calls into his dispatch, which is our dispatch, just two different people at two different terminals, but in the same room. And they say, okay, and they dispatch police. That was the nature of using public safety rather than merely police. With regard to your other question, yes, a portion of Howard Center Street Outreach's calls are recorded on our Valcor system. They will put themselves over as going to calls. Officers will call for them to respond to something with the officer. There are some to which Street Outreach will respond solo, but it's only a portion because the majority of what they do is not filtered through our dispatch. Nevertheless, that was the reason, the rationale for talking about a public safety call volume. And frankly, we're also talking about the end result is going to be public safety, not policing, because we're not merely talking here, at least I did not think so. The end result of the RFP is not to measure only what police will do. It's to measure the possibility of all these things being diverted to non-police resources.
Thank you. So just to beat the dead horse, public safety for you was a reference to what would be fire department and police department potentially.
That's correct. It's fire department and police department, and then and I do think that on some level there will be some examination of the fire department's workload and the calls they get, but not nearly as in depth as is necessary for what we're talking about here. Again, the bulk of what we're talking about is how to take those call type ones, which is really an ad hoc measurement of call types that can be handled by a phone response during the COVID era, and determining whether or not some large portion of those can be further subdivided into new call types or diverted into other resources, and then determining whether or not some call type 2s may fit that bill as well, but some call type 1s need to be elevated back purely to police, because the type designations were not designed with this in mind. They were designed, again, with COVID response and just how is a police officer going to respond, not could a police officer or someone else respond.
Right. Okay. So are folks comfortable with leaving public safety?
Can we just put Burlington Police
Yes.
Department and Burlington Fire Department? It's current call volume and workload. Isn't that what we just said? You just said public safety to you was fire department and public police department.
No, I indicated that it also included some degree of Howard Center Street Outreach, which also operates through Valcor and is dispatched or records their calls for service through our dispatch. And it incorporates other agency assists, other police departments, other agencies that will call in and use dispatch. So I think that it's more than that. I mean, if there's some sense of ownership of, there's no effort to make public safety owned by police. That's not the purpose here.
I know. I guess it's just still. I just think it's still it's confusing, but I am frustrated by or concerned about the idea of public safety. When we use public safety, not having a distinction between like a holistic idea of public safety, which includes like prevention and anti-poverty, whatever, and then like elements, and then public safety, which we really mean is just like crisis response and service response. And I think I am struggling in these conversations continually to like sort of have conversations about all of those things, and then it all gets conflated into one thing, which we assume public safety means crisis response. And so my attempt at changing the language that we're using to talk about this is changing the way that we're thinking about public safety and changing it to be more of a holistic understanding. And so that's why the semantics on this struck me as wanting to tweak it slightly, but by all means, it's not going to make or break public, like our holistic public safety model in this time. So if I'm the only one, that's totally fine. We can just leave it as is. It's just something I keep coming back to.
Can we make it, am I hearing something like maybe saying police and fire and crisis response and some kind of other?
a service, yeah, crisis, yeah, and response service agencies. Yeah, I just wanted to be more specific about what aspect we were referring to, but
So
if
I
I'm
would
the
say,
only one who feels strongly about it, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
so Perry, to that end, I totally see where you're coming from, but I actually think your change discourages what you're trying to achieve, although generally your changes and concern, would apply by keeping it broader. You basically want every call, basically, right, that BPD gets, and we want to know what happens, right? We want to know soup to nuts, what happens, how many, and by keeping it broader, you'll be able to assess, do the analysis that you then want to, use that information, right, the raw data, and then go to where you want to go, which is to this place where we're going to start calling these non-police calls, right off the bat. We're going to create a system to divert those calls this way. I think we should keep the broader term for that reason.
Can I say something?
If I understood correctly.
It's Commissioner Durfee. Can I say something about that? I think when you get down past that, when you get to end goal, there's room in my mind to really talk about alternative services, and then somehow too, specifically for Councillor Freeman, the who, where, and how. We might focus on that and try to, because I hear what you're saying. I think that it's further down that we're going to see that made clearer, and then also if we work on the who, where, and how, we might be able to be a little bit more purposeful with the piece about alternatives and including some specifics. That's just my thought. I mean, I think you can say it. I think it's said in different parts of the document, and that's just and I think leaving it broad, it allows us to capture everything.
Great. So along those, welcome, Director Dodson. If you don't mind, just because we already have so many voices and you did have access to this document, unless you have a specific comment, I'd rather save any of your feedback for the end. Is that okay? Great. So along those lines, are people okay with turning to some of the who, where, and how, and have any suggestions there?
Councillor Hightower, can
Yes.
you, for me, or I think it might just be me, talk a little more about what you're looking for here with the who, where, and how? When I guess what's confusing is this site traffic stop data. I'm trying to link my who to that, and I just don't know what you mean by that.
Right. So I think it's actually unlinking. So what I heard us say the first time we discussed this, which was a while ago now, but was that we were zooming in too much on the call volume and data, and that we weren't, that wasn't as full of an assessment of the department as we would maybe like to see. And so I was trying to use that framing to help us zoom out a little bit here. So one of the other things that we can look at is, things like Stephanie's research and her coworkers around, okay, how do we start to, like, when we say, who are you policing? It's like, how do we start to take a better look at, like, populations that are over targeted or under targeted? When we're talking about where, is there some kind of differential approach that Burlington Police Department takes for different parts of the city? How should that fit into, like, what the consultant looks at, if anything? Is that something we don't care about? Do we delete the where? I just want us to start having some kind of discussion on, if we don't just want to look call volume and workload, what do we want to look at, and what does that mean? And I I think especially because I think the police commission hopefully has a slightly better understanding of some of the things that you might want to look at, but I didn't want to I already made so many changes to the document. I didn't want to completely steer us in that direction, but that's the kind of thing that I was hoping for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've always asked as a commissioner is, and when I think about consulting, I think about looking at, and Chief Murad had sent us a graphic at some point. I'm not sure if it was in this meeting or a commission meeting, but looking at, could the consultant look at scheduling? And I don't know how to say that. I mean, one of the first things that I would look at is how many people are needed to do the job? How many officers do we actually really need? I was very interested. I'm more of a data logistics person, and so I was more drawn to that graphic that Chief shared with us some time ago. Scheduling, personnel, specific routes, just more about, I don't want to call it labor cost control, but I have an MBA, so that's the only terminology I know, but, more about, what is that end of it? Scheduling, labor distribution, how many officers are really needed. And then the other thing that I've always been interested in is sort of the administrative labor side as well. So what happens internally, and in my experience and in the assessments that I've done working with consulting teams, those things are sort of focused on in terms of, what is doable, what are we asking for here? So those are the things that I'm specifically interested in as a police commissioner. And then I also don't know if this is something the consultant's going to look at, but I think if you're on the commission or looking at policing, officer training is news of the day. Types of training. I'm not sure if that's going to be included here. That's it from me.
So can I chime in?
Please.
I like a couple things Karen said.
Go ahead, Franklin.
Sorry about that. All right. So I like what Karen said. I think I will second. I think one of the things that came up for me, she brought up, which is looking at, I don't know the human resources term. I think there's some people that do know it better than me. But looking at how many positions and what would be best for the department, right? So taking the call volume, taking the needs of the department, the community, and saying, well, maybe we need, X in managerial roles. Maybe we need X in road patrol. Maybe even give us like 3 or 4 scenarios. Like if you have this many, you might be responding better to these areas if you have X many. So I think I second what Karen's saying, which is like focusing more on the what, which we're doing now. And then so I guess one is the breakdown of positions, not just the number of officers. But then I think what Karen also said was the routes, or don't know there's probably a better term for it, but the way police patrol Burlington, are we doing it in the best way possible? Is there an alternative? Do we need 4 officers at all times at the New North End? Does the New North End need, an outpost for police officers there? Do they need a little office there by the fire station? Would that be better for Burlington? Does the South End? Things like that. When we look at the presentation by BPD, it was pretty clear that they had obviously they have a set system, but is that the best system? Are there problems with it? And how can we, those are the 2 things that I think are really good.
So do you think we flesh that out in where we talk about staffing levels? Does that go to that middle of the paragraph under where we talk about determining appropriate staffing levels? Seems to all tie in there. The root part, I think, stays with where, but.
Can I jump in real quick? Yeah. Yeah.
Harry and then Milo, just to start a stack.
Oh, okay. My concern a little bit with that framing is that, which I guess, and I was trying to figure this out earlier because I understand why the scope of the RFP needs to be more like pretty potentially kind of narrow and or just rather focused. But like my concern with that is just like in general, like if we're asking how many, like what are the staffing levels we need, what are the managers, like compared to what and like for why, like, because my concern is like ultimately the answer that we're going to get is like that we need a lot, or like, and I don't know if we're gonna necessarily get that, but like sorry, I'm sorry, because the conditions, and I'm not just in the sense that, so like the critique on police departments being underfunded is part of a critique of like preventative anti-poverty measures being underfunded. And like, if you don't look, I'm struggling with this framing in general, because like, if you don't fund those things, and if you don't think of housing, like you don't look at the fact that people have not been making, like our minimum wage is peaked in 1968. So if you're not looking at like those systemic causes, if you're not looking at people's access to education, access to food, I think I already said housing, access to healthcare, specifically mental health care, which we're seeing like horrendous levels of people with mental health issues ending up in incarcerated or houseless. Like it just feels sort of like a predetermined answer that we need. People don't have the supports that they need, so that's why we're relying heavily on like crisis response and policing systems to like once people are at a point of crisis. So I guess I'm just wondering, for folks who are wondering, like I don't think it's bad to look at the levels of staffing, and I think we started to do that this summer when we made like analyses based on other cities of our size and kind of looked at those things. But I'm just wondering if we're not also answering the other question about the systemic causes and doing prevention, then how are we actually figuring out like what is, they all sort of seem tied together. So I'm wondering for folks who want to see that as part of this RFP, like how they're also addressing that aspect, which I feel like is just an unanswered question or an unanswered factor and variable. And maybe folks who have a research background or whatnot can speak to that as well. But I'm trying to fit it all together and how this works.
So Milo and then Karen, and if folks can, I can't see everyone because we also have the RFP up, so just be patient with me and or raise your hand virtually. Oh, I don't know that you can. So Milo.
So kind of adding to what Councillor Freeman mentioned is the following. Do we want to make sure that we have these tasks done in a specific order? Because what I'm thinking about is if we look at the numbers first, and then based on the numbers being the call volume from the various sectors of public safety that we just talked about, and we say, okay, do we have enough officers on the road to meet this particular call volume? That to me is not the place to start, because we want to start first with making sure that that call volume is looked at and evaluated to see if some of those calls that are coming in can be handled by individuals other than the police officers. So we don't want to go straight to evaluating how many officers are needed on the road before we've determined what we can actually take off of the department's plate. Because if we can say we have event A occurring X amount of times, and we can move event A to here so that a police officer does not have to actually be involved, then that will change how many police officers are on the road. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Yes, no?
Yes. I'm just waiting. I wanna-
Because I think it's going to be really important to, I mean, when we come to where, definitely we have to be looking at everything across Burlington and the different wards, because the different wards get different amounts of services. And some wards have more of a particular type of call than other wards. So we definitely want to be looking at the breakdown of the types of calls for each ward and looking at why does one ward have this type of volume over other wards, you know, and then what can we do? A big thing, going back again to community outreach. What can people within the community do to help the police department reduce certain types of calls? So that would be part of the conversation as well. And that's all I have for now.
So Milo, did Audrey adequately capture what you said, or do you want to summarize it if she did not?
Oh, let me go back to I'm on Zoom on my phone, but let me bring back the document on my computer. It's going to take a moment because it just logged me out.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Karen.
Okay, thanks.
So I just wanted to say, in terms of looking at the number of police officers and a fear that that's somehow going to change the way the consultant looks at this and produce some type of data that may not be authentic. The reason that we're doing the RFP is because we need an outside person to come in and assess the city situation. And I do think that, you know, the list of things that we ask the person to do definitely can impact the work. But after reviewing, you know, the folks that we chose, they're doing, you know, I did reference checks today and read everybody's references, just this one group's references. And, you know, I trust that this selection, they're not, the lens that these folks have is really very clear, and they're way above what we can do at a community level. And number two, you know, any kind of database assessment is going to probably make a recommendation based on, you know, just the data that they're going to have to produce. So whether we ask it outright or not, you know, there is going to be some recommendation. And, you know, I totally hear, you know, what everyone is saying about, oh, well, we don't want to skew this, but we definitely, the original goal of this is to implement the racial justice resolution, to really put this thing on the ground. And, you know, the sooner that we can get to an assessment with real data, I think the better we can serve the community. I'm done. I know Kyle was waving frantically, but I don't know if you can see him or if you want.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure we get to the commissioners, and I know Kyle can be a little long-winded. And he did have this RFP longer than you all did. So given that, Kyle, if you can keep your comments very short.
Absolutely. I'll take long-winded as a compliment. All I have to say is that per Councilor Freeman's comments, I think that it is clear that poverty and history and all sorts of things are connected to our current status, but the RFP is already a big wish list, which is as we want it. And I think the best thing to do is to move forward. I think we will learn a lot in interactions with actual vendors who are experts. We will learn about the feasibility, time-wise, money-wise, things that have happened elsewhere that'll be really important and help us move forward. But I don't see how the RFP for the BPD assessment is going to address poverty. I don't think that's what that part is supposed to do, although our community probably wants to look at poverty and its connection to policing and what happens in BIPOC communities. But this is a relatively narrow, discrete activity, I believe, to look at what happens currently in terms of policing and how we can broaden that to a more public safety lens. And also, I thought Perry had a concern earlier. We got to separate public safety from public health. We're doing two things. They're not necessarily the same thing. They're connected, but they cover some different things. I thought that clarification might be helpful. That's how I'm seeing it. And I think this is, one piece of a much bigger part of work, the RFP and this assessment.
Great. Perry wants to respond. Also, just want to see if Stephanie and I think Shireen, if you had any substantive input, but Perry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we can do this RFP. We can look at the staffing levels. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if we don't address poverty, then we're going to need a lot of cops. So we can do an RFP that looks at, like, the mandate that I heard from, like, organizers across the country was not like, how can we just not look at structural changes and just figure out, like, let's just do like a quick analysis of police departments and just, like, let's just guess, like, how many cops do we need? Like, let's just run some, like, data, look at our workload, and, like, that will just be the answer. Like, I understand that this RFP is, like, trying to be super focused and narrow, but, like, the call that I heard to change that happened this summer was around the systemic issues. And, like, maybe that won't be addressed in this RFP, but, like, because it's the first one and we're looking very narrowly at the police department, but, like, we can do this RFP, we can get feedback, we can get certain answers, but I think it's just going to be potentially incredibly limited. And if that other conversation and that other, like, work is not being done, because the divest from the department and looking at the staffing levels, that and the organizing that asked for that to happen did not come from, like, the department has too little of a workload, so they should have less cops because the workload is not enough. That's not where that campaign comes from and where that organizing comes from and where that concept comes from. To me, it comes from this aspect of we are under investing in communities and so thus we are forced to overinvest in these carceral and punitive systems. And so that's why we have, and the staffing levels were part of that. And then there was also another conversation about the fact that we just have what looks like more staff in Burlington compared to most cities of our size, which was, I think, just ended up being an interesting aspect part of that conversation. But I just think that we're veering into this aspect that, like, we're sort of asking the wrong questions, and that's sort of my concern with the frame with this RFP. But we can try. Maybe this is what we need. I don't know.
Great. So Shireen, and then again, Stephanie, if you have anything to say, I can't see you, so I'm sorry if you're raising your hand. You are? Okay, so let's go.
I'll talk after Shireen.
Shireen,
Just going to be really quick. I hear what you're saying, Perry, but we're really going by the language in the resolution, which is inquiry include a full operational and functional assessment of the BPD. So I think what you're talking about just doesn't sound like that's part of this assessment that we're doing. I think it will come up on the other side when we're getting community input, but I don't think it is at all in the realm of what we're discussing in this assessment. That's just my opinion, and that was my takeaway from the resolution.
Great, Stephanie.
I actually think the RFP is fine the way it is. There's might be some small language changes I would make to just make it crystal clear. But I think a lot of the concerns that have been raised are actually implicit in this document, and a good consultant will be able to read that and will be able to respond to what's underlying in the text there. You know, the issue around structural problems, you know, as my work as an economist, those take years to solve. And so that requires a plan that is much broader than simply this particular focus. You know, I think this is a first good step in terms of public safety, but the structural problems that we face really have to be developed in terms of citywide policy by the city council and the mayor in terms of a plan to address various structural problems of poverty, low wages, single parent, single moms, and the struggles that they have and so forth. This is, so I think that's a longer time frame than this particular, what this particular RFP is trying to achieve.
Great. And then throwing in my 2 cents on that before going back to Milo is, yeah, I think that the resolution did ask for an assessment of BPD, and to some extent, and not to some extent, and that is what this RFP is trying to do. I think we do still want to be careful with how we're framing that. I do think sometimes saying like, well, what could we get if we had like 100 police versus 50 police is a little bit of maybe something to avoid, because of course, like you'd be able to get twice as much. Like it's not, it's, I don't know how useful that question is more than anything, but I do think that ultimately this is a question of, I think to some extent the original framing was good with like, what are policing, what are alternatives, where does it make sense to move to the alternatives, and what is the long-term benefits of that. I think that this was really helpful to me in terms of, I mean, I guess to all of us in terms of getting some additional ideas that I wouldn't have put in on things to look at. So I'm glad we still did this brainstorming process. We obviously don't have an end time, but I guess I would, one, to keep asking for input on this section, also start looking to other sections, and also to get you all to start thinking about, given as we probably won't finish the language here, clean it up as a group, what you all want the next steps to be. And with that, I'll go to Milo, if you were raising your hand again.
Yeah, I had just a thought about the police officers themselves. Are we making sure that they are surveyed? I guess it, or do we consider that to be implicit? Like what language would make sure that as part of this evaluation, we're actually talking to people that are doing the jobs currently of responding to these calls?
I'm sorry, I got distracted. Could you say that again?
Sure. I want to make sure that as part of this process, we're actually talking to police officers. And is that something that is implicit in language that's already here? Or do we need to clearly state that that needs to be part of the process?
I mean, I think since I've spent the most time with it, I'm happy to answer. It wasn't implicit to me, so I think if you want that to be in there, then unless I hear other folks say no, that is something that we should add in.
Well, I guess the question would be, what would be the purpose? What information would be derived there that's germane to this RFP?
I think it's important to hear from the people that actually are doing the job in terms of responding to these calls. I think their input would be important in terms of what do they feel are calls that they go out on that they feel that, hey, that shouldn't be coming into the department, as one example. But I think it's important that when we're looking at all these processes, we have to involve the people that are actually doing the job.
I think that makes sense. I think it's very easy to put a line in there that just simply says something about, you know, who we would expect the consultant to reach out to, which groups. police officers, the mental health community, so on and so forth.
I think that was helpful. Seeing no, go ahead, Perry.
This isn't a response to Commissioner Grant. This was a response to the other the conversation that we were having before. I think if we're talking about the function of BPD and the resolution getting at that, I guess I'm confused, or I'm concerned about the focus on staffing specifically. It seems like we're talking about the broader function of BPD. It seems like, to me, I interpreted the resolution language as not just being about like what other agencies can participate in policing and like other alternatives to policing, but like I think because we don't just need other agencies to do policing, we just also need the Burlington Police Department to be to like not be racist and to be less racist. And so I guess I'm just, there's just an aspect to the framing that of this that still feels a little bit off to me, but I think I'm also just struggling to figure out exactly how to articulate that in alternative language. So I apologize for that, but yeah, I think I'm just still struggling with it a little bit, and the focus of this RFP.
I think that's fair. I don't think that the rest of the RFP has as much of a focus on staffing as we've had in this conversation. I think that was a little bit unique to this conversation. So I do think the RFP in general has much more of a focus on alternatives. I don't know if that addresses your concern, but I definitely think that that was more, I think that that was something we are adding to the RFP as opposed to something that it now is mostly covering.
I mean, so my question is, are we just looking at other agencies that can deal with the workload? Or are we also asking this consultant or consultancies to look at, or like an agency to look at the practices of the Burlington Police Department? I guess I'm just not, maybe I feel like I don't know if I'm just not reading this correctly or if I'm missing something.
There's some specific that in terms of policies that you did want to look at, I think it would be, now would be the time to bring it up in terms of the how or where or anything like that. Or what?
I spent most of this week looking at there's a really short deadline and around the community oversight model and charter change committee. And so I've been working on that for like 20 hours this week and last week. So I think my brain is like sort of fried, and I apologize for that. But I've like read an unbelievable amount about community oversight in the last week, and I've just been in like hours long meetings like almost every day about it. So, and trying to, because I have to write a proposal. So I apologize if I'm just, maybe my brain is like just not really fully grappling with this, even though they're related.
Is there something along those lines that you wanted to put in, or was that an aside?
I honestly, I don't know if I can, other than that, I feel like, and let me see if I'm still looking at my draft, so I don't know if you've made changes now to the.
Okay. I'm gonna go to Frank.
See in how the scheduling. Yeah, I mean, like I said, like I think we can pass this. Maybe I was also just seeing if other people had similar concerns, and it sounds like I might be the only one who has these concerns. And if the rest of the joint committee feels like this is the right direction and the right first step, then and it seems like an overwhelming majority, then maybe we should just go with that. And maybe I'm totally off in left field or just sort of isolated in my view, and that's okay too. And like I think we can start with this and see where we end up, and then reevaluate and go from there.
Great. Franklin?
So I was just going to make a quick, I wrote down something that is probably not good. So, but I wrote it down, so I'm going to read it. And I don't know if Audrey, if you, I don't know if you could take notes about it in case
Sure.
people like it, but I'm going to try to, I think some people disagree that I agree with what Professor Grino says, which is that a good person will know what to do. But part of me wants to like belt and suspenders it. And after staffing levels, I guess I would add something like including but not limited to a performance plan that looks at the optimal, and that's where I would ask for help, but a performance plan that looks at the optimal number of positions between road patrol, administrative roles, and managerial roles. Again, we can edit that, but and then end parenthesis there, just defining this, I guess, the 3 levels: staff, managers, admin, and then just write and road patrol routes or police patrol routes and responses. So I think what Milo was saying was like, I was looking terms HR on different HR websites is like an HR audit, which I also was really excited about early on because we're looking at the best police department and we're looking at creating the best police department here. And I think an HR audit sort of gives the staff level, the union members. I would like for that to be anonymous so that like somebody at, road patrol officer's been there a year, feels very comfortable being totally honest about his gripes and what we can do, as well as the person who's, in their 29th year about to retire and can verbalize those in writing and then give it to the expert and then somehow they take that data. So more like I was thinking about a survey. So I don't know how to put that in here. I just kind of wanted to reiterate that I was excited about that in the beginning. Like a professional job function analysis type. I mean, none of these words fit because you look them up and they have multiple definitions. So I think we just have to be clear on what we want. But thank you.
So not seeing anybody else's hand, so I'm going to jump in and say that's actually just in terms of, in case you do end up deciding, in case Shireen and I are supposed to wrap this up ourselves, that is the opposite of what I heard us like saying something like finding the optimal number is the opposite of what I heard us say last time, where I said we want them to bring us information and then we make those more subjective things. I think, again, that's a lot to ask of a consultant, is to make subjective decisions like that. So I would, unless I'm hearing strong consent for Franklin's idea, that is in contrast to what I heard folks say last time. Not saying that we can't have folks look at those things and compare them to other cities or things like that, but I would stray away from the beginning part of that.
I'm not wedded to anything. I just kind of felt like we were throwing out ideas and having, so it doesn't have to be optimal. It doesn't have to be a recommendation. I'm open to all of that. It's more about putting something in there that beyond staffing levels for me that kind of just gives a direct mandate of like, this is what we want. But I get you. We want more of the raw data so we can do it ourselves, kind of thing. I get it.
Okay. So I saw Shireen's hand.
I was just, I am glad what you said, Zarai, because what I'm struggling with here is I feel like we're then taking the other RFP information, the community input, and I feel like we're taking both of those, and that informs what our community safety, public safety system might look like. So I don't know how we could have someone speaking to optimal numbers in this context when really we're putting it all together, and that's the $1 million question for us, in my opinion.
I assume Franklin's hand is still up from a minute ago, so I'm going to kind of move us.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to kind of move us on to look at the other sections. I think we've got some good input here, and I'm getting a sense of where the committee is at. On end goal, I'm trying to remember, I made these a while ago. I think it's the same. Oh, it's specifically saying that the end goal is kind of, maybe to your point, Perry, more about looking at potential alternatives and what those could be, and looking at the barriers and benefits to those. And then some things on possible guidance. The only thing I changed here is in support formats. I think I changed the title, which didn't show up because there was I just did this today and didn't realize it was tracking changes for a bit, but I added Kyle's position as a potential resource for the consultant, because I don't think he was on board yet when we started this process. I also added this part on supervision and key dates for deliverables, and that they should give us monthly updates, which I'm not sure how often we'll be meeting, but I assume it'll be at least once a month. So hearing updates from them. And then on prerequisites, I collapsed two of them into one, the quantitative and qualitative research skills and social science methods. And then on two, and again, I apologize, those changes aren't tracked, but I made them today, so I know what they, on two, it just said public, or it said police best practices in law, and I changed it to justice policing or public safety to try to be, again, a little bit more broad on what, who might be applying for this. And then made the submission guidelines a little bit more clear in what we wanted to see, including adding page limits to different sections and spelling out what those sections should be. Oh, and that's bolded awkwardly, if you don't mind. So feedback on any of those sections, as well as thoughts on next steps.
Zariah, may I say something? I mean, I think a lot of that looks good. You know, I think it's hard to wordsmith as a group. And my thought, you know, typically, you know, what people can do is send in their suggested revisions, and then you as the person handling this document can integrate them.
So the reason I can't do that is that would violate public meeting law.
Oh.
So the reason we're doing it awkwardly like this is I can hear
Right.
feedback publicly and then make those changes, but you do kind of have to state it, because if the point is to get to consensus on this, then doing it over email is unfortunately not okay. Otherwise I would, trust me, I would never choose to do create a document like this.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So it seems to me that if the consultant is going to look at alternative models of public safety, which is basically what we're asking, that the consulting firm that does the last RFP that we looked at, that looks for public input on what the community wants, they would be relying heavily on that document. Is that correct? Do we say that anywhere in here? And if not, maybe that would be helpful to articulate as one of the starting points for the work.
I think so. An end goal, which we can re-articulate, and it says the selected consultant will help the Joint Committee examine alternatives to policing. Specifically, are there other interventions that are more effective or rooted in community values, see community facilitator RFP, than police for certain non-criminal calls for service or even certain crimes?
Okay.
Is that explicit enough, or would you like?
Yeah, you know, I think that's fine.
Other thoughts?
It's Commissioner Durfee. I like the end goal as a point of clarification. I think it as a next step suggestion. I don't know if folks are comfortable with it, but I think I guess it's a question about the public meeting law. So once there's a draft of this, we'll come back all together as a group again and look at the final draft. Is that what we would do? I think it's more of a question.
It's up to you. So if folks are feeling, I know that there was some question on the scope of work section. If folks feel like Shireen and I are going to get it right enough, then you could just give us the authority to, like we did with the community facilitator RFP, to the two of us finish it off and send it. If it feels like there's maybe too much discussion still there, then we could do that, and then you could review it at the next meeting and then approve it or not, or make changes to it. But that is, given that I will probably be one of the people looking at it, I wouldn't want to make anybody decide in either way.
I would make a motion to adopt the, not now. I think that's the way to go, for the reasons Professor Guino stated, to make a motion to adopt the recommendations and comments and input given by the committee members here today into a final RFP to be sent out. I think you know, at the end of the day, we could be here all night and I'll still have changes, you know, so it's like, it's clear the person's going to get this. They know what they're doing. At the end of the day, we're talking about police department here. If they have data, you know, we're not talking about another kind of agency.
Franklin, just to clarify, are you saying you want it sent out as it is on Audrey's screen right now?
With the changes that you and Shireen are going to make.
Okay, I see. I was like, oh, it looks very rough. I would feel uncomfortable with that grammar. Okay, understood. Is that an official motion or is that a suggestion?
It's just my suggestion to throw out there so people can, you know, I don't think we're prepared to make a motion yet, but.
Right, awesome.
I would concur with Franklin's position on this. I think that if you incorporating kind of the spirit of this discussion is sufficient for me to approve the RFP in its current form.
I agree.
Okay, we got 3, Perry, or Milo. I don't think we heard from you. Did you have a?
Yeah, I would, given the amount of changes that we just made and the fact that I didn't have a chance to read it through because it came over this afternoon, I would rather see a cleaned up final version.
Great, Perry.
Yeah, I was going to say basically what Commissioner Grant said, and more so just wanting to, I would probably want, to look it over some more and consider the edits that were made by you and Commissioner Hard. And I mean, so I might vote, if we do put it to a vote, I guess I would vote no at this point and would prefer to table it until next meeting, but yeah.
Great. So I was going to suggest if it was just one of you that maybe you just join the final thing, but with 2, I think it starts getting into a lot of the people on the shy away from that. But
I thought about, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Perry.
I thought about that, but my concern was that I would want to change things that wouldn't really feel like I've already kind of, that I just feel like then I would be influencing it in a way that people, the majority I wouldn't know if there was actually a support from the majority. And I was a little concerned about that. But I hear what you're saying too about it being, if it's multiple people, then being a little concerned as well.
Great. Then I think we have disagreement. And so I think we have 2 potential different motions, and I won't tell you all, but would entertain either motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion to let's see, hold on. I'll make a motion to incorporate the changes discussed at the October 26, 2020 Joint Committee meeting to the draft RFP 2-1 and to make the document final. With a second, I'll ask a point of information to the chair.
Motion made by Councillor Paulino. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Seguino. Go ahead, Franklin.
So my question for the chair is, are you able to incorporate the changes, send it to us on one-on-one for us just to say, that looks good? Via email?
Say the date again.
So would there be any violation of open meeting law if you sent us the document before the final document so that we can just give the okay if only one of us is in the email? Just say, yes, that looked good. So not with the intent to change it, but just to see, obviously if there's some huge mischaracterization, which there won't be, but just to see it so people can get that last chance.
Joy, we talked
Being an open meeting.
shuttling in our training. I don't know if that counts as shuttling, but Joy.
I mean, I think that it is obviously okay to distribute the final version to everyone to look at, but if it gets to the point where people want to make any changes to it, then you definitely have to come back. And there can't be any discussion in a group email. So.
Okay.
So if it's just to read, that's fine. But if there's going to be any kind of change or discussion, that needs to be done in a public meeting.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you all say is, Franklin, and sorry, I didn't 100%, but I think your motion was to do what you had originally proposed, but to have us send the final document. And then if everyone is okay with it, then it would go ahead and pass. But if it's not, we would have another meeting about it.
Exactly. Thank you.
I think that sounds a little too much like having a vote over email.
Okay.
Yeah, now that I hear that out loud, I think that's a little too far.
Okay. So no, that does not work.
Well, I'll strike the second portion of it, given that I think that it's a good motion still, and I would advocate for people to follow it because it sounds like none of the changes really are material. And I think that although it's really important to get the language right, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people who have, in this particular RFP, unlike the one before, I feel like even more so, people who do this for a living, they've probably done it many times, and I'm sure we're going to get a big, sort of like a deep talent pool. So I would support the motion without the opportunity for review. I think that obviously further to that, you guys have shown that your goal is to incorporate what we say here. So I have I'm not going to lose sleep. I don't have any reason to believe you guys wouldn't change something material.
Any other discussion on the motion that's currently on the table?
Yeah, I mean, the last RFP, we only got 3. So I guess I don't have the confidence or I guess the definition of a deep, pool is we don't know what we're going to get until we actually get it. And I appreciate where people who would be submitting the RFPs, that they will definitely have had a skills level where they've done this type of thing before, but they haven't done this type of thing before in Burlington, Vermont. So that's definitely something that we have to consider. And just, I feel like we've added a lot of language, and words are important. And I preferably, before voting and saying, yes, let's go along with it, I would like to see it completely typed up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion, or can we move to a vote?
And
Go ahead, Perry.
And Counselor Plato, can you just repeat it with just as it is without the second part struck so I can just rehear it? Just so I make sure I'm remembering it correctly.
Sure. Well, the motion was essentially to prepare the draft BPD RFP 2-1 for to be finalized with the input received at the 10/26 joint committee meeting, and to finalize to essentially put out to the public for
Okay.
to receive RFPs.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
quick point of order question for myself, Joy, if you could help me out. Is this for the vote? We just need a majority of the people present, right? We don't need a quorum of the committee to vote in any one direction.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Given that I think people will vote differently, I'm just gonna call you as you appear on my screen. So Milo.
So we're voting on Franklin's motion. Okay, so I would vote no.
Stephanie.
Yes.
Franklin.
Yes.
Karen.
Yes.
Perry.
No.
And Shireen.
No.
And then I'm also going to vote no. So that's 4 no's and 3 yeses, and the motion fails.
I just want to say the reason I voted against it, I'd like to have Milo in particular, who just got this, be able to look through it. So I have every faith in Zariah. She's done a great job on this, but if we can, 2 more weeks, I'd rather get everyone's input, and without Randall and you all and Jabu as well.
I agree. I tried to be even-handed when I'm representing everyone, but given that, there's 2 people who want to take a look at it again, I wouldn't want to take that away from them. So can we, do we have to move to table or?
Not really. I don't think, but we could if we wanted to.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, if we should move to table, if you don't mind doing that, Carrie.
You want me to? Yeah. I would move to table or postpone the discussion until,
Second.
table or put it on the next meeting's agenda to discuss for deliberation at our next meeting. Do we have a date yet for the next meeting?
Motion
Okay.
made by Counselor Freeman, seconded by Commissioner Hart. Discussion.
I just have a quick question. Does that prevent you, the fact that you've tabled an item in a public meeting, an open meeting, prevent you guys from doing the work that you're planning doing without being in the public meeting between now and then, as opposed to just either not finishing the item or not taking action and just recalling it like we would have? So it's more of a technical question. I support it.
I don't know, Joy.
I'm not sure that it makes a difference. You could make a motion to have yourself and whoever else you'd like make the changes and then bring it back next meeting for discussion.
Are you okay with that, Perry? And can you specify who you'd want to work on that?
Yeah, I would move to have Chair Hightower and Commissioner Hart adopt the changes reviewed and recommended at the 10/26 meeting and bring the draft, the updated draft back to the Joint Committee for further consideration at our next meeting.
Is that okay with you, Commissioner Hart? Since you seconded, is that okay with you?
Yes, that would be fine with me. Thank you.
Okay, great. So any further discussion on that? Great, thanks, Audrey. Seeing nobody, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, so that passes unanimously. And we'll move on to our next item, which is 3.02. I was envisioning for this that we would hear from Chief Murad on an update on what information he has or he thinks he can get us. And then based on that, we decide what we want our next steps to be in terms of reporting back to the council. And if that makes sense to folks, then I would turn it over to Chief Murad.
Thank you. I was able to get some information from some federal partners. It's not information that they want. It's privileged. It's privileged information is their information, but I was able to look through it in ways that I think will address some of the questions that you were asking. They include sort of a set of data about the amounts. I think amounts were important. I think some of the idea of property, of what kind of property we were talking about with regard to equitable sharing was at issue as well. So there was a sheet with 300 plus items in it that cover what Burlington has been awarded from federal cases from about 2003 to 2019. And it showed awards to Burlington of about 1.13 million during that time period. It's not all of the cases because some come from different federal partners. We've shared the information about how much we get per annum previously, but that works out about to what we're talking about. At over 16 years, it's 1.13, and it's actually a little more than that. And the total amount I've shared in the past, and I'm happy to share again if somebody wants me to and can get it now, but I'll just continue in this vein first. The value range to BPD of those, in other words, the amount of assets that were equitably shared with BPD based on BPD's participation in those cases, and that includes it's predicated on the hours that were worked, what the investigators or what contribution the assigned investigators made to the case. The value ranged from $87,600, which was BPD's share of $130,000 of USC that was taken in a 2013 case, to $42, which was BPD's share of a bank account that was worth $653 from a 2012 case. And that wouldn't have been the entire amount from that case. That would have been just one asset from that case. Most of the amounts are much larger than that small amount. These are monetary seizures of $130,000, of $40,000, of $31,000, $35,000, $60,000, $85,000. And the smallest amount seized was $650 cash. Now that's not that $650 bank account. That's a smaller amount. Where there were a Mercedes-Benz SS550, a Lexus, Audis, a Range Rover, a Harley Davidson. There was cash or currency in lieu of an address. A lien was put on an address, and there was cash currency taken in lieu of that, 39,000 of which went to BPD for a 2008 case. There was $220,000 payment in lieu of a $250,000 monetary judgment. And of that, 24,400 went to BPD for a 2014 case. A case involving property in Underhill with several kilos of drugs and also kilos in cash taken both from Underhill and then kilos in cash taken from a yurt in upstate New York. And that too was portions of that went to BPD. So those are examples of the kinds of disbursements that we're talking about. They're not disbursements of street level users, of people who are taken in the course of a regular arrest. These aren't assets that are seized from somebody who has not had any kind of due process, and that it's just taken because there's confidence that that person won't be able to navigate the system and avail him or herself of a way to get those assets back. That happens with asset forfeiture in other locations. It's not the case here, nor in the data that I was able to look at.
Great. So that was an overview of what information you had. Can you give us, is there any more information that we can expect to come, or any like written version of this or anything of that sort?
So, no, I mean, that's the overview that I have to present for the time being. I mean, I think that some of this might be achievable through, freedom of information requests, for example, but I'm not at liberty to share it when it was presented to me by a partner. I can share the information about things we took in simply because that is public record in Burlington. And I have had those, the amounts that we've taken in, that's part of the process for the mayoral recertification of it. I can point out that we believe currently that not recertifying not only prevents us from participating in the future, but could subject what we currently have to being returned to the government. And those are resources that we're currently using for, I just authorized the use of some of it in order to get into the cell phone of a suspect, of a person who died. And we are looking into that death and the nature of that death. We're probably going to use some of that to facilitate some of the training because the training budget was affected by the budgetary decisions made because of COVID, not owing to the resolution, but we took significant budgetary hits to our training to the order of 70% of training decrease, at the same time as the resolution does want us to commit to training at a level beyond the rest of the city with regard to racial justice training, et cetera. So we're probably going to be using some of those funds for that kind of training. And losing that kitty, having to return it would be a significant blow to operations that are already feeling the pinch of what COVID has wrought on our city's revenue.
Do folks, opening it up for questions directly to John, or if folks have just thoughts on next steps? Go ahead, Shireen.
I have a couple of questions. Chief, can you, I have to write them down because I'll forget the second one when I say the first one. Okay, does the money from these go into a general fund? How do you handle the money when it comes in?
The amount of money that is ultimately distributed to us by the government, according to their own rubrics that have to do with our participation, with the total amount taken, et cetera, whether or not they've distributed sums to victims, which they're required to do by law first, whether they've taken in the amount that comes to us is put into a singular fund. It is our Equitable Sharing Fund, and that has to be used for specific kinds of law enforcement purposes. It can't be used to paper over other expenses. It can't be used for recurring costs. It can't be used for personnel, for example. There's a sense of it. I can't remember the exact phrasing, and I could find it for you. I believe I shared it in previous presentations on this about specific law enforcement purpose.
And so I'm sorry, I have just a follow-up on that and one other question. And how easy is it for you to determine how that has been expended over the last few years?
Easily. Those are records we have to keep. We have to be able to demonstrate how it is that we're using it, and we have to be able to meet audits on it, which we do. Again, okay. The biggest bulk of it most recently was the creation of the emergency response vehicle. And the tools that went on that platform. Some of the training development costs of it also were underwritten by this. I believe that some of the funds were used for I'd have to confirm this, but I believe they were used for a very large symposium that was called about the opioid epidemic 2 years ago. And
so is that something, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that something that can be shared with us? easily? Like,
This information? Yes, I
Yeah.
can get that for you.
okay, that would be great. And my last question is, when you started, you said, if I understood it correctly, that the department may have to return funds.
So the unspent portions that we currently have, if
Okay.
we do not get recertified, we would not be allowed to participate in the equitable sharing anymore going forward. We believe that we would be subject to returning that money as well.
Anything you have that you haven't expended by, okay,
Correct.
all right, thank you.
Franklin, is that a hand up? And then I think I saw Karen.
Yeah, I guess I hate to do this, but I was thinking, because people expressed so much interest in this, I was hoping two things. If a small letter, even an email detailing the update, and we could table this for the next meeting. I know Commissioner Harp expressed interest in this. Professor Seguino's also newish to this subject, although probably had been tracking it and probably very aware of it. But I guess I don't feel comfortable taking action tonight. I don't think there is, but I would feel more comfortable if more members who could weigh in.
Yep.
Given that it looked like we were going to have a contested sort of vote on it.
So all I was hoping to get to today was an understanding of what we wanted to do next. So what our goal was for the next meeting. And go ahead, Karen.
I was going to ask that question that you just said. So thank you for reading my mind.
And also what our goal is, what we need to achieve that goal so that we can be prepared.
Well, as I understand, if we do nothing happens, right? So I think it's more people wanted to know more about it. I think with this memo, for the people who aren't here, we'll have that. And I guess with that information, they can, we're required to, I think actually we're required to report back, right? Yeah. So I think we have to take a vote.
And I'm asking what we want to do to be ready to move in that direction for the next meeting. So like, is there more information that we need? Are we asking for someone to do, like, just what are our next steps? What are we doing at the next meeting to help make that report back happen?
Well, I have a quick question. One of the questions that I had was, I believe the last meeting we had confirmed that we only get funds related to cases where there were actual convictions or some plea agreement that was in process. Is that correct, Chief?
That is correct.
Okay. And then out of that pool of funds, I had a question, even though I know that we don't get that funds, but does that pool have money that is taken that is not the result of a conviction or plea bargain? Were you able to confirm that?
I'm not. I think the funds that go into equitable sharing are all have to come from the same. They're separated on a case by case basis, so they don't go into a pool, and they're in those cases, and the cases are almost. I think they leave open the possibility that some cases some tiny fraction of cases may not have a conviction or maybe in a plea bargain, which is why they can't unilaterally say that every single one follows a conviction. But the vast majority do. Certainly the ones that I've just discussed are, because that's why we're talking about them, because they're post conclusion, whether that was a conviction with a jury or a plea bargain or what. But those are not there. Each one is separate, so that you don't take the money from this case and then pool it with this from this case. It's shared out based on this case only. And that's also how the sharing is determined. your participation or your agency's participation in case X. And case X, the total value of assets forfeited during case X, and then those are distributed according to, as I said, I mean, it's the federal partners are making those distribution determinations, and they are required by law to make victims whole first if there are victims to be that can be determined, and then they share out finally, ultimately to participatory entities that have based on their amount of participation, the level of participation.
Well, I do understand that, but I just, I guess I would feel better knowing if anywhere in that pool, although I understand what you're saying, that Burlington doesn't get those type of dollars, but does that pool take money from people that haven't been convicted or
no,
have a plea bargain?
Each case has been finalized. That's how the money can then be distributed.
So sorry to jump and maybe, but because on the federal, like at the federal level, the whole program, like any of the cases involving Burlington or any of the cases in Vermont have to involve a conviction or a plea, right? But federally, that's not true. So those could be administrative or other forms of. So if Milo is thinking about it as a big pool that the federal government like collects and then redistributes, that pool would have all kinds of cases in it, but all the cases in Vermont would be.
But the pools don't commingle. The pools are based on the case. I mean, each case is its own amount. And right. You can't. I don't believe that you can commingle those any more than an attorney can commingle escrow A with escrow B. It's
right. The amounts, any of the amounts that Burlington is getting are from Vermont or Burlington cases that they contributed to that are not involved. But the program, the federal program as a whole, does deal with cases that aren't.
They can't sell people's assets until the case is done. The federal government doesn't do what other places have done. I mean, there are states operate in different ways, and there can be asset forfeiture done in different ways prior to conviction in states. That's not how the federal program operates. And I can try to get a statement to that effect to confirm it or dispel it from someone in the state's attorney's office. And I would ask actually, Commissioner Hart, can you help me sort of articulate this, and then together we can write to the same person to whom I wrote before with you, CC'd. Yeah. But if you can articulate this question that Commissioner Grant is asking in a way that we can get as clear an answer as possible from the U.S. Attorney.
Sure.
Sorry, so I've not been looking at hands. I see Harry's hand up. And I think that's it.
Thank you. I just, I guess I'm confused because I sort of is along the lines of what Commissioner Grant and Chair Hightower are saying. I was under the impression that this allows us to participate in the federal program, which does rely on a pool and doesn't.
Not a pool, it's the amount of money from specific case to specific case to specific case. And those don't commingle into a single pool. They're based on concrete assets or currency seized as part of a concrete case and then distributed to participants according to the amount of participation in that case.
Okay.
I think there's a belief that if some of the water's dirty and the water all goes into the same pool, then it's a dirty pool. That's not the case here. I can't change if people think that this entire practice is problematic or dirty. I understand that some people do, but what we are talking about are cases that are as I've said before, they are long-term cases followed through with multiple layers of judicial review and prosecutorial review, and they are followed through to a conclusion against individuals who are high-level drug traffickers, sex traffickers, people who work in violence and cause violence on others. These are the victimizers. These are not victims. And the money that is derived from that is kept separate from other monies, and it is seized and then distributed according to these rules. Are there victims that need to have monies distributed to them? Are there people who need to be compensated? And then who has participated? As I gave with some of those, figures of amounts that are, if 130,000 in United States currency was taken in one particular case, our share of that one was a big one. That was in 2013 of $87,695. But that was the largest of all of our participatory amounts. That's not the whole thing, because there are other people and entities that would have participated in that. I don't have the details of that specific case, but that's indicative of how it works. In no instance was the total amount seized the total amount that Burlington received. We receive a portion. It is equitably shared among the participants.
Audrey, just checking in to see if you had thoughts on confusion or.
Oh, yeah. I'm just under the impression, Commissioner Grant, that the equitable sharing that Vermont participates in and that BPD participates in isn't doing what you're concerned about so much as, like, generally when people think of loopholes in equitable sharing, it's more about the percent of the funds that the police department can receive. And so, if they participate in equitable sharing, you can receive up to 80% of the funds back to a specific police department, and which tends to be more than some states allow. And so that's usually the part that people are concerned about, or is accessible to Vermont, because Vermont doesn't allow for asset forfeiture in anything other than criminal convictions. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I'm not sure it answers my greater question, but that makes sense. I will try and think of a way to summarize it, because I hear all the things that the chief is saying, and I understand all the things that you're saying, but there is a greater issue when things are taken away from people where there are no convictions and there are no plea bargains, and people go through a trial and they're found innocent, and then they can't get their money or property back. And it sounds like we're definitely not participating in that. But if that pool that we pull from does at any point, I can find that problematic, but I can see how attractive all that money is. And in terms of coming in and enabling us to have resources that we might not have, but at the same time, there's the morality of the issue. So
I would imagine
that's my overall concern.
I'm hoping that Commissioner Hart is hearing this as well to help me articulate it in an email. But I would imagine that it's only pooled in the sense that it becomes federal money, and if that's the case, then any federal money somehow is part of this. And if we get federal money for anything, whether it's a road or a library, it's all got that. It's not individually that way. It's
like Burlington and Vermont can't, the money pool, the pool, it's not so much a pool as it's money that is acquired from a particular case, and that case is handed off to the federal government or is shared with the federal government. And so then they take all of those funds and give some back to the state afterwards. So it's not pooled with other states that do allow for asset forfeiture that we wouldn't support here. Or to the extent that like the types that like do allow for forfeiture without convictions and that kind of thing.
Just want to quickly check Perry and then Franklin. I can't tell if your hand is still raised from the previous time if you're raising your hand, but Perry, go ahead.
Was I first in the queue? Did you say? But so you say, so they're taking it and then it's going to a federal program and then we're getting a percentage of it back, is what you're saying? Is that what you're saying, Audrey?
Yes, sorry. And it's not pooled with other states' forfeitures either. It's like as if it would be as if like each has their own account almost. And each department who participates in such an action with a federal agency has their own separate account that they pool their resources, their agency's resources into like BPDs and a federal agency. They've received now the liquidated assets after a conviction of something. And it's all now taken by generally the federal agency, and the federal agency gives a certain amount back to whichever local agency participated in the activity.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
I had a question, which was, do we have a policy around whether that's at the state level or if it's the Burlington Police Department around, I'm hearing you say we don't, and this is, I think, a question for Acting Chief, that we don't take money from these kinds of cases, or we don't take money from, like these low, is that codified somewhere, or is that just of like, this is how we have tended to do things?
We don't, we don't seize money. It's not, I don't know that it's codified in directive, for example. I would have to check on that and will. But it's also something that I think Councilmember Paulino can speak to this. It would have to be done through his office. And it's not something for which we would generally receive cooperation from the state's attorney unless we made a very, very specific case.
Wait, sorry, you can't have a policy on asset for
it's not so we seize things that are evidence of crimes. And then if it's no longer evidence of a crime, it's returned to the person. If it is evidence, that it stays in evidence. And I'm not certain, I'm not entirely certain what else, how else to explain that.
Well, I guess because I think I'm just not, because you said we only use it for these kinds of cases, not for like petty cases. And I'm asking, is that just going to be true because you only do it through the federal program, or is that just because you've never pursued it in petty cases, but you could? I don't understand. Like,
I think.
I don't know if Councilmember Paulino was going to weigh in.
Sorry, I have a barking dog here. I just got him out. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think that we talked about it at one of the first meetings, that Vermont law has such a high burden that I think that we don't use it essentially. And also in our courts, in a criminal case, the defendant has the ability to file a motion to get their property returned, and those are granted pretty liberally. So the fact that the law in Vermont is so, requires conviction, as we talked about, and second, judges before the conviction will return the property. We, I think as a collective group, I don't think anybody really made this decision. It was just like more practice. It just doesn't get used much. So that answers your question about why we don't do it for I wouldn't call them petty crimes. I would just call them, they're state crimes. And the only other option then is the federal government. And unlike the state attorney's office, the U.S. Attorney's Office has a greater amount of discretion in what kind of cases they deal with and prosecute. And so it's really just up to them and their agents and their capacity and their criteria, which I don't know anything about, as to whether they decide to get involved. And I think part of their analysis, I'm sure, is whether, the resources they're going after are beneficial for the program, their agency, whether it's substantial enough funds. But it has not been something that we do at the state level, unless it's voluntarily. Rarely you'll see somebody who will offer it up voluntarily as a way to sort of, and those are done rarely, where a defense attorney will suggest, how about and they're not gone, we don't go through the police department even sometimes. Sometimes it's donated to charity, for example.
What I meant, if I may, Claire, and thank you so much, Council Member Polino, for that. What I meant by petty is the level, the scope of it. If we arrest a person for public use of a substance and find in that person's pockets 2 crumpled $10 bills, that is not being seized. That is not evidence of a crime. It's not. We're not going to take it and hold it until there's a conviction down the road for that public use of a substance, which, by the way, there will not be a conviction for that crime, and it we'll never get to that point with it, and we're not holding that money. That money belongs to the individual, and that's not what we're talking about. Nor are we talking about saying found the same individual not in public but in this front seat of his or her vehicle, nice or fancy or old and decrepit, and then seizing that vehicle. That's not something that we do by policy, by tradition, by just a practice. And the bulk of the reason is that it, again, has to go to another level that has a whole bunch of hurdles and will be overseen through the state's attorney. Now, there are instances in which it may become something that is valid or something that we would consider and make a case to the state's attorney for. If property is the instrument of the person's alleged malfeasance, that can become something very important. We have an individual who has been committing a lot of driving offenses, very dangerous driving offenses, and at some point exploring whether or not to seize that vehicle in a permanent way, that could be a valid method of addressing this issue. But it's not. Already we've taken that vehicle a couple times and it goes back to the individual. We do not seize things in that manner unless they're evidence of a crime, and then they're kept until they're no longer evidence. So
I think I'm still a little bit confused, because I heard Franklin say, sometimes, or people are like, anytime you ask for it back, we tend to be very loose and give things back very easily. And I hear you say, oh, we've never done, but we may be able to do it here. I guess it's just, I don't understand how you decide what the line is between when you seize an asset and when you don't. And it doesn't sound like it's it depends on if it's a federal case or not. It sounds like it's something else, but I don't know what it is. And I'm just suggesting or throwing it out here that if we can't articulate that may be something worth articulating to help the police department, if asset forfeiture is something that is a practice that we want to continue, which I don't want to push that opinion on this committee or on the council, but that is, it just is very loose to me as to when we say, yeah.
I see what you're saying, Councilor Hightower. I think what we're confusing a little bit is I was talking about seizure, which is what you're interested in, seizure. So the seizures we're talking about are through this federal program. To some extent, we do physically take property, right? If somebody gets booked and it's held overnight, but they can come back, because the jail has specific policies, let's say, which, by the way, the number of people being held overnight has greatly reduced. So we're talking about we're talking about things that have changed dramatically even just the last 2 years. So those people, the jail has policies about what you can bring in there, and they are usually available to be picked up. Those are the kinds of things that I think Chief Murad was talking about, where somebody could come back and pick them up, except for, you know, he spoke about taking an individual's license. That seems to make sense if that individual has, like, you know, 10 or 20 court orders not to drive and has gotten accidents, that kind of thing. I haven't dealt with something like that, but I could see myself having to do that. Anyway, that's that. So we're talking about taking property doesn't mean seized, is essentially the. And from a practical perspective, essentially the standards from the court are take pictures of it unless you really need it. Meaning, like, you can't, pictures will not do it justice. The problem starts when there's like a theft, right? And there's like a lot of property and you can't identify it. But generally, no, we don't. We usually return property, and I would just rely on the chief's opinion on that. But in my experience, it's not even something that we deal with that often, because people just know. They go to Burlington Police Evidence Locker and they pick it up. If the police officers have a problem because they think it might be evidence, they give me a call or an email, and they tell them to come back within 72 hours and so forth. And they're pretty good about following up with me about if I don't respond to them right away. I don't know if that helps, but just.
Some properties taken into custody because the person can't have it when he or she goes to, if he or she is going to be held, but it's returned to them afterwards. Some properties taken into custody because, or seized because it's going to be evidence and it's needed on a permanent basis. Asset forfeiture is property that has been forfeited after a much longer process. And it's not the same as things, it had to be seized in the first place or at some point along the way. But sometimes it's not even seized during the initial investigation or the executions of the search warrants, et cetera. Sometimes it's found after the fact during the court case, and it's found through forensics accounting, and it says, you bought this this is how you laundered your money. You laundered your money by buying a Mercedes S550. So that belongs to the government now once you lose your case, or if you take this plea deal. And the person says, okay, or fights it and loses, and then the government does in fact have that, and that asset is forfeit.
Go ahead, Shereen.
Chief, would there ever be the ability, based on a unique federal case, to, how do I say this, to refuse the forfeiture funds?
Could we refuse forfeiture funds?
In a given case?
If for whatever reason we felt, if post participation in the case, we came to have doubts about that case or something along those lines, I see no reason why we couldn't refuse the funds. Or although I'd have to check on that, actually. I mean, once we certify that we're participating, I'd have to see. I can't imagine that they would say, no, you have to take this. I think they just say, if you don't want it, then you don't have to have it. But
yeah, so along those lines, let's say you have a case where the assets are forfeited, but then later the conviction is overturned or whatever happens, but you already have, that you might have sold the vehicle, you might have sold the home. So I guess there could be cases where the funds can't be returned.
Yes, I'd guess that is the case. I'm not certain of it. Please, let's incorporate that into our letter.
Okay. Yeah, because that might go a long way to addressing some of this if one knew that on a given case, if there hadn't been a conviction yet, or that there could be an escrow fund, for lack of a better term, where something is held, where the funds are held until there's a final conviction. Sometimes we all know that can take years, right? But okay. Thank you.
And the disbursement of these funds does take years. Yeah. The monies that I was talking about are not monies from cases that have been conducted this year or even really in 2019.
Right.
The received monies are all from cases that predate that.
Right. Commissioner Grant, I'm wondering if the best way to check in with you is through what's the best way for me to be in contact with you on this? Is it by cell phone? Is it text, email?
Sure, cell is fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other points of discussion or thoughts on next steps? It sounds like we've got at least one next step in terms of further questions.
Just to add, if you're looking for more information about seizure of property, the state statute on forfeiture does lay out when property can be seized and procedures for that. So.
Well, the question for me is not, is what happens when those procedures are violated in some way? And someone who shouldn't have had property or funds taken away had that happen to them. So I hear all the good stuff, but I just still have that question that doesn't seem to have or we haven't been given a clear answer on.
Again, I think that we can incorporate that request into the letter and determine whether or not there are instances, for example, in which a person has been made whole from the regarding the assets forfeited at the end of a case. Even, a conviction, assets forfeited, dispersed, they're gone. The person prevails on appeal and says, "I want my funds back." We can determine whether or not that's done.
Great. Go ahead, Perry.
I guess what remains for me is, even if the aspect of the forfeiture has more elements of sort of addressing the due process aspect, I guess the aspect that's still outstanding for me is that the agency being able to seize assets and then sort of gain revenue, sure if that's the correct word, through that, it's not a good system. If that item that ultimately is forfeited is not going to be destroyed and or has to be liquidated in some way, then that I suppose could go to a general state fund or some sort of, but to go directly back to the agency that is responsible for seizing those items makes absolutely no sense to me. So I guess that I hear that one aspect and one concern maybe is somewhat answered, but there are still outstanding concerns for me. Can I ask one more? And the question I'm trying to remember, because I know we did get a presentation from you, Chief Merritt, about this, but was there an inventory of everything seized in that? That ended up, is that something that was available to us?
No, I was able to give you examples. I apologize.
That information. Sorry, I just was trailing off.
I was able to give you some examples of materials, etc. An inventory. I don't have an inventory that is mine to share. I have amounts that are mine to share and figures and have, but the inventory, no.
What and why? What is that? Just not public information, or is that not?
It comes from it's from a federal partner and is theirs. So I'm not. That's not my information to share. I can ask if it can be shared. We can certainly. It can probably be applied for, but
okay. Yeah, if possible, that would be, I think that would be important to see as well.
I don't know if that's to the same source, but if that can be
It is, it's the source of what I told you tonight with regard to amounts and specific items like the Mercedes-Benz or the Lexus or the Audi or the Range Rover. But that's something that the Joint Committee can certainly request of the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Any other questions or discussion?
I just asked a question, Joy. I think it was Joy that said, gave a resource of where this could be, information could be found, some information resource, and I didn't quite get it.
Yeah, so it's the state's, I can give you a citation to the state statute if you want. I can also email a link to that if that's easier.
Yeah, if you could email a link, that'd be great, because I think most of what's being discussed here might be clarified by taking a look at that. Thanks for that resource.
Sure. Yep, I'll send that around.
But may I just add something? My understanding is what we're talking about, though, isn't that statute, that we're talking about forfeitures under federal law, not under the state forfeiture law. Is that correct, Chief Murad? Okay, so Commissioner Durfee, you'll be looking at the state statute, but what we're talking about is the federal.
Although I believe that both Joy and Franklin have indicated that the state statute does limit what we can do because we're beholden to those state laws as well.
So putting a cap, for example, on certain things?
Right, that's what I was under the impression. I know you're talking about federal, but go ahead.
Except that, and I'm not even going to pretend to understand this, but except that the federal program is often used to not use state caps, but that's somehow not the case in Vermont, is my understanding.
Is that in the white paper that Audrey did for us? Sorry, Chief. Did Audrey's paper cover that?
Audrey?
Hey, so my paper did cover it didn't cover like how Vermont or BPD delineates like where it does and doesn't seize, but it does have, along with the citations, like the statute citations, what Vermont law up to allows the state to do or any local agency to do. And so in that document are also this, like at the very end of the works cited, you'll have links to various titles under Vermont law, but I can work on updating that memo to address the questions brought up here.
Great, seeing no more hands. I don't know if we have a true path forward, but I think we at least have some questions that we are hoping to get the answer to, which I will at least take as progress. And with that, I'm giving up on doodle polls. So we are going to set the next meeting tonight. And the sense that I did get from the doodle poll is that Mondays and Thursdays work best for folks. And so clearly, Perry and Franklin and I can't do council Mondays, but I know Franklin has a conflict on Thursdays. So I would suggest that we either meet because of the RFP, I was planning on suggesting we meet in 3 weeks, but given that we have to relook at the RFP again, I wonder if we should meet a little sooner. I think potential dates that we have is, we're not going to do election night. So November 5th. Or November 16th, which is 3 weeks away.
The 5th is hard for me, but I have no problem with this group meeting on that day.
Either date would be fine with me.
We could also do the 4th. I know Wednesdays haven't historically worked as well for people, but
I have a charter change committee meeting on the 4th. Did you say?
I can do the 5th, Councilor Hightower. So
I can do the 5th.
And what was the other date? I just pulled up my calendar.
the Monday, the 16th, an off council Monday.
I could do the 5th and or the 16th.
Can anyone not do the 5th? I don't know. We haven't heard from. Do we still have a quorum? Do we lose people?
We're good, right? Yeah, we've still got
6.
Yep.
We have 6.
Oh, Stephanie's screen is not on.
We gained Franklin and lost Stephanie. So, okay, can we tentatively schedule for the 5th then? I'm hearing Shireen can't do it, but I'm hoping at least one person who's not here can, and that also gives them a chance to review it. And since Shireen and I will be working on the RFP, it's less critical that.
I can do
Yeah.
the 5th.
I think the sooner the better, because by that time we'll also have something from Commissioner Durfee probably on the references, right? So we don't stall too long on that. Maybe we set the 16th as well. I don't know.
Yeah, Randall can do the 5th. I just texted him.
Good, great.
Way to be proactive. Great. Then let's set our next meeting for Thursday the 5th at 5:30. Does that time still work for folks?
Yep.
Great.
even 5.
And so agenda items will include approving the BPD RFP, hearing back maybe potentially some answers from Chief Murad, Commissioner Hart, and Grant, and making the final selection on, or I guess we already approved it, so, but finishing the first RFP as well, and moving that into contracting stages. Great. Thank you all for a long meeting. Appreciate being with us. And Shireen and I will try to get the RFP turned around a little faster. I had a great goal of sending it to you all last Monday.
It was my fault, the delay, so.
So thanks everyone, and we'll give you a little bit more leeway next, or a little bit more heads up next time. And
You need a motion?
do need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Hart, seconded by Councilor Freeman. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 8:01.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan.